My name is Morgan, and I never imagined that at 35 years old, my life would be turned upside down by a single phone call. Just hours before everything shattered, I had been sitting in the oak-paneled office of my late uncle's attorney, barely able to breathe as I heard the words, "You are the sole heir to his estate. $11 million. dollars." It didn't feel real. Uncle James, the man my family had quietly cut ties with decades ago, had left everything to me. As I signed the paperwork, I kept thinking this was going to change everything: our debts, our plans, our future. Eric and I had been struggling for years, and finally the pressure would be gone. I even stopped by a jewelry store on my way home, buying an expensive watch as a surprise gift for my husband, a symbol, I thought, of a new beginning. I couldn't wait to see his reaction when I handed him the box and told him the news. The rain had just begun when I pulled onto the highway, soft streaks tapping the windshield. The radio was playing some cheerful song, but all I could hear was the drum beat of my own thoughts. I pictured Eric's smile, the way his eyes used to light up when he felt hopeful. Maybe we'd finally buy a house. Maybe he'd find the spark again in his art. Maybe we'd start a family. My heart swelled with possibilities. But fate has a cruel sense of timing. I barely noticed the semi-truck 2 lanes over until it suddenly swerved, tires shrieking against the wet pavement. In an instant, the world slowed. The trailer jackknifed, swinging across the highway like a wrecking ball. I yanked the steering wheel, but it was already too late. The impact was violent, metallic screams filling my ears as my car spun across the asphalt. The airbag burst open, slamming into my chest. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the little velvet box fly open, the silver watch sliding across the dashboard, almost in slow motion. My last coherent thought was of a billboard flashing past the crumpled glass, a smiling family and the words, "Protect what matters most." Then nothing. The hours dragged on, each one heavier than the last. I kept trying to convince myself there had to be an explanation for Eric's coldness, that maybe the shock of the accident had left him frozen or unable to process what had happened. But deep down, a sick feeling had already begun to spread. Something wasn't right. Even Dr. Foster, the physician who checked my injuries, noticed the silence surrounding me. After explaining that I had 3 broken ribs, a severe concussion, and a fractured leg held together with surgical pins, he added quietly, "Most patients in your condition are surrounded by family. Is there anyone we can call for you?" I tried to smile, but the effort cracked something inside me. On the 5th day, I called Eric again. This time, he actually answered. I could hear music and laughter in the background, as if he were at some celebration. "Eric," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady, "I've been in the hospital for nearly a week. Where are you?" A long pause followed, filled with the thump of bass from wherever he was. Then his voice came, colder than I'd ever heard it. "I don't have time or money for a loser, Morgan. Some of us are moving forward with our lives." Before I could respond, the line went dead. I stared at the phone in disbelief, my breath catching in my throat. A loser? 7 years of marriage, 7 years of sacrifices, and that was all I meant to him? Sarah found me an hour later, curled up as best I could manage in the hospital bed, tears streaming down my face. Without asking questions, she called for a sedative, and as the medication blurred the edges of my pain, only one thought kept repeating in my mind. Eric was hiding something. Over the next 2 days, the darkness in my heart grew heavier. I refused food, slept only in fits, and ignored the nurse's attempts to cheer me. It was Dr. Jessica Parker, the hospital psychologist, who finally broke through. A petite woman with sharp eyes and a calm tone, she sat beside my bed and told me plainly, "You're experiencing trauma on every level: physical, emotional, psychological. You've been betrayed, and your body is demanding rest. It's okay to feel like you're drowning. Her honesty made me cry harder than any empty comfort would have. I didn't tell her about the inheritance right away. The money seemed irrelevant compared to the gaping wound Eric had left in my heart. But 2 nights later, as the pain and confusion swirled together, I whispered it out loud. I inherited $11 million the day of the crash. I was on my way to tell him when the accident happened. Dr. Jessica's eyebrows lifted in surprise, and suddenly the puzzle took on a terrifying new shape. If Eric knew, his cruel words weren't just abandonment, they were strategy. 2 days later, Melanie finally visited. She stepped into the room with a small bouquet clutched like a shield, her eyes darting everywhere but my face. "You look terrible," she blurted, then grimaced. "I didn't mean it like that." I didn't have patience for pleasantries. I asked her, "Why have you been avoiding me?" My voice low but firm. She sank into the visitor's chair, twisting her wedding ring nervously. "Because I didn't know how to tell you. Eric, he's with someone else now. A woman named Vanessa." The words landed like another collision, but worse. "What do you mean, with someone else? We're married." Melanie's eyes filled with tears. "He's been telling people you didn't survive the accident. He even held a small memorial at your apartment last week. And Morgan, people are saying he married her. A courthouse wedding, just days after your crash." The room spun. My heart monitor shrieked as my pulse skyrocketed. Married. While I lay broken in a hospital bed, my husband had declared me dead and wed another woman. I could barely breathe. Sarah stormed in, urging Melanie to stop, but the damage had already been done. Melanie apologized through tears as she left, but her words kept echoing in my skull. When Sarah returned, she didn't try to soften the truth. She simply said, "This isn't just betrayal, Morgan. It's fraud." Her voice was steady, her eyes full of determination. She was right. This wasn't all about heartbreak anymore. It was about survival. I needed help, and I needed it fast. That night, as I lay staring at the ceiling, I decided to call Benjamin Harrison, my uncle's attorney. If Eric thought I was powerless, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. Benjamin answered on the first ring, his calm voice a lifeline in the storm swirling around me. "Morgan, I'm glad you called. I've actually been trying to reach you. There have been developments." My stomach tightened. "Let me guess," I said bitterly. "Eric has been sniffing around my inheritance?" Benjamin sighed. "More than sniffing. He came to my office yesterday with a young woman, claimed to be your next of kin, presented what looked like a marriage certificate, and even death documents stating you'd passed away. Fortunately, none of it held up under scrutiny, but it was a brazen attempt." My blood ran cold. The woman, did he call her Vanessa? Benjamin hesitated. "Yes, he said she was your sister and therefore entitled to a share." I almost laughed at the absurdity. I don't have a sister. But even as I said it, my mind flickered back to the strange sense of familiarity I'd felt when Melanie had shown me Vanessa's picture. Why did she look so much like me? Why had she appeared in Eric's life just as Uncle James was dying? The thought left me sick. "Benjamin," I said, my voice low, "I think my husband is planning something bigger than fraud. I need you here tomorrow and dig into Vanessa, everything you can find." He agreed without hesitation. After we hung up, I asked Sarah to help me set up a small security camera in the corner of my room. If Eric came, I wanted proof of whatever scheme he was running. That night, I barely slept. My body still ached with every breath, but it was nothing compared to the storm inside my chest. How had I ended up here? A week ago, I was daydreaming about freedom and a new beginning. Now I was bracing myself for war against the man who had once sworn to love me. The next morning, Benjamin arrived with his briefcase and took a discreet seat by the window, half hidden by the curtain. Sarah adjusted my pillows, helping me look frailer than I actually was. Dr. Jessica stopped by as well, coaching me to remain calm. Remember, she told me firmly, he can't take your power unless you give it to him. At exactly 2 o'clock, there was a knock on the door. My heart monitor betrayed my anxiety, the beeping quickening as the handle turned. Eric stepped in first, looking nothing like the struggling artist I'd married. He wore a tailored blazer and a watch that gleamed under the fluorescent lights, expensive, smug symbols of a man who thought he'd already won. His expression wasn't relief at seeing me awake. It was annoyance, quickly masked by a performance of concern. "Morgan, I'm glad you called," he said softly, as though we were in some melodrama. "I've been so worried." His tone made me want to laugh and scream at the same time. "We?" I asked, my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest. He turned, gesturing toward the door. A slender woman stepped into the room, hesitant but elegant in a designer dress. Dark hair framed a face that stole my breath. Because it was familiar. Not just in the way of a stranger you think you've seen before, but bone deep, as though I were staring at a mirror 20 years younger. "You remember Vanessa," Eric said smoothly, "your cousin's daughter." His lies rolled easily off his tongue, as though he'd practiced them. I stayed silent, studying her. She looked uncomfortable, her eyes darting between Eric and me. Eric moved closer, slipping papers from the inside of his blazer and placing them on the tray at the foot of my bed. "The doctors say your memory might be unreliable after the accident," he began. "These are just some simple forms, nothing complicated. They'll allow me to handle your affairs while you recover. You don't need the stress of managing everything." I almost laughed at the audacity. "You mean the $11 million I inherited?" I asked bluntly. His face flickered with surprise before he smoothed it into false concern. "Yes, such a blessing, but such a heavy responsibility. I only want to help you." Before I could respond, Benjamin's voice cut through the room. "How noble of you," he said, stepping out of the shadows. Eric spun around, caught off guard. "Who the hell are you?" "Benjamin Harrison," the attorney replied calmly, "Mrs. Wallace's legal counsel, and the man who has documented your multiple attempts at fraud." Eric's mask cracked, his charming facade hardening into rage. He lunged toward the tablet Benjamin held, but Sarah stepped forward, her stance protective. "Don't even try." The tension in the room snapped like a wire. And then Vanessa finally moved closer, her gaze locking on mine. She looked pale, trembling, her lips parting as though she were about to speak a confession she could no longer keep buried. Vanessa stepped forward, her eyes fixed on me as if she were staring at a ghost. The papers Eric had placed on my tray sat untouched between us, but it was her trembling voice that filled the silence. "Oh my God," she whispered, her hands shaking. "She's my mother." The words hit me harder than the crash that had nearly killed me. My breath caught, my heart monitor spiked wildly, and for a moment I thought I'd imagined it. Eric's face twisted with fury as he grabbed her arm. "Shut up," he hissed under his breath. "Stick to the plan." But Vanessa pulled away, her gaze never leaving mine. Slowly, with unsteady hands, she reached into her purse and pulled out a worn photograph. She held it out to me like an offering. My fingers trembled as I took it, my eyes scanning the faded image. A teenage girl, barely more than a child, cradling a newborn in her arms. Her eyes were swollen from crying, her expression filled with fear and sorrow. I knew that face. I knew it because it was mine. 17 years ago. The photograph I thought had been destroyed. the secret I had buried so deep that even Eric never truly knew. Vanessa's voice broke through my stunned silence. It was the only thing I had when I was adopted. My parents said it came with me, proof that somewhere out there my birth mother existed. I've carried it with me every day since I was old enough to understand. Eric tried to laugh, a harsh, brittle sound. "She's confused, Morgan. Look at her. She's manipulating you." I turned to him, my voice shaking but strong. "Be quiet, Eric. For once in your life, just stop talking." He froze, startled by the authority in my tone. I looked back at Vanessa, really seeing her now. The shape of her eyes, the curve of her cheekbones, even the way she carried herself. All reflections of me. How had I not recognized it immediately? Tears blurred my vision. "I was 18, I whispered, my voice cracking. A senior in high school. My boyfriend wanted nothing to do with the baby. My parents said it would ruin our family's reputation. They sent me away to stay with an aunt until you were born. It was a closed adoption. I was allowed to hold you once. Just once." Vanessa's eyes shone with tears as she clutched the photograph to her chest. "My adoptive parents told me I was loved and wanted, but they never hid that I was adopted. When I turned 18, they supported me in searching for you. I never thought it would be like this." Benjamin leaned forward, his sharp gaze still locked on Eric. "How did you meet him, Vanessa?" She looked uneasy, glancing at Eric before answering. "I didn't find him. He found me. About 3 months ago, he showed up at the gallery where I work. He said he knew my birth mother. He said she was wealthy, that she wanted to reconnect but didn't know how. He made it sound like a miracle." My stomach turned cold. 3 months ago. That was when Eric and I had moved apartments. That was when I'd rediscovered the small wooden box I'd hidden for years. Inside, the hospital bracelet, the tiny baby hat, and that one photograph. He must have gone through it, piecing together the secret I had tried to bury. And instead of telling me, he had used it to spin a story. Vanessa's cheeks flushed with shame. "He told me that marrying him would make you happy, that it would show I had stability, that I was building a life you could be proud of." She shook her head, tears slipping down her face. "I believed him." Benjamin's voice was sharp, cutting through the fog of emotion. "So let me make sure I understand. Eric found your daughter's adoption records, tracked her down, manipulated her with lies, and then married her under false pretenses, all to claim Morgan's inheritance?" Eric sneered, his mask completely gone now. "Half the money would have gone to her anyway. I was just expediting the process." "By committing fraud," Benjamin said coldly, "and possibly murder if Morgan had died from her injuries." Vanessa recoiled from Eric as though seeing him for the first time. "You used me," she whispered, her voice breaking. "All those promises, all those words, none of it was real." Eric snapped. "Don't be naive. You wanted to find your birth mother. I gave that to you. The money was just a bonus." I stared at him, my chest heavy with a strange mix of rage and sorrow. "No, Eric, the money was your only motivation. You never loved me. I was convenient. And when I became worth more dead than alive, you tried to erase me." Sarah, standing near the door, called security into the room. The moment had finally come. Eric's carefully constructed mask had shattered, his schemes laid bare. But the real revelation wasn't his betrayal. It was the daughter standing before me, the child I thought I had lost forever. The room felt like it was spinning, though my body was rooted to the hospital bed. I clutched the photograph Vanessa had given me, my fingers trembling against its frayed edges. 17 years of silence, 17 years of trying to forget, and here she was, living, breathing, and unknowingly dragged into Eric's twisted plot. I looked at her face again, at the undeniable resemblance, and my heart ached with both guilt and awe. Eric tried to seize control once more, his voice sharp. "Enough of this drama. "Morgan, sign the papers. You're in no condition to manage $11 million. This inheritance is slipping through your fingers while you waste time on fairy tales." Benjamin's voice cut through like steel. "The only fairy tale here is the one you spun to deceive this young woman and to commit fraud. We have evidence, Eric. Video recordings, forged documents, and now this, your attempt to coerce your wife in a hospital bed." Eric turned on Benjamin with a snarl, but Sarah stepped between them, her hand already reaching for the call button that would summon hospital security. The room buzzed with tension, each second stretching painfully long, until Vanessa's voice broke the silence. "I trusted you," she said, her tone filled with raw hurt. "You told me we were building a life together, that helping you would also help me find my mother, but all along you were just using me." Her eyes brimmed with tears as she turned to me. "I'm so sorry, Morgan. I didn't know. I never would have—" Her voice cracked. I reached for her hand, ignoring the pain that shot through my ribs. "This isn't your fault," I told her softly. "You were manipulated, just like I was. Eric preyed on both of us, but you're not to blame." Vanessa's grip tightened, her tears spilling freely now. For the first time in weeks, a flicker of hope pierced through the rubble of my life. Eric was gone, and though the road ahead would be messy and complicated, I had something he could never steal from me: the chance to rebuild, this time with the truth on my side. The days after Eric's arrest passed in a blur of police interviews, legal paperwork, and long conversations with Benjamin. He explained just how deep Eric's deceit had gone: bank accounts he'd tried to access with forged signatures, emails he'd fabricated to make it look like I had entrusted him with financial decisions, even false claims of my death submitted to the estate office. He was thorough, Benjamin admitted grimly, but sloppy enough to leave a trail. I listened in silence, my body still weak, my mind whirling with a mixture of rage and disbelief. 7 years of marriage, and I had never truly known the man beside me. It was a sobering, painful truth. Vanessa began visiting every day after that confrontation. At first, our conversations were hesitant, filled with pauses and awkward silences. What do you say to a daughter you had once held for only a minute before giving her up forever? But little by little, we began to talk about her childhood, about my memories of being 18 and terrified, about the hole we had both felt in our lives that only now made sense. One afternoon, as sunlight streamed weakly through the hospital window, Vanessa told me about her adoptive parents. "They're wonderful people," she said with a small smile. "Dad's a high school science teacher. Mom's a librarian. They always made sure I knew I was loved. They never tried to hide that I was adopted. They told me you were very young and wanted me to have opportunities you couldn't give." Tears welled in my eyes. "That was all I ever prayed for," I whispered. "That you'd grow up safe and loved." My chest tightened as Vanessa reached across and squeezed my hand. "I did. And now, I have the chance to know you too." Sarah, who had become more than just a nurse to me, often gave us privacy during those conversations, though she'd still slip in occasionally with her wry humor and an extra pudding cup. She had witnessed the darkest moments of my life and was now quietly cheering as pieces of light returned. Meanwhile, Benjamin continued working tirelessly on my legal case. "Eric is facing years in prison," he assured me. "Fraud, bigamy, forgery. There's enough here to keep him behind bars for a long time. And with Vanessa's testimony, the story becomes even clearer." Still, there was one chilling discovery that left me sleepless. Detective Jennings visited one morning, placing a sealed evidence bag on my tray. Inside was a small prescription bottle with my name on it, but for a powerful sedative I had never taken. "We believe Eric may have been giving these to you without your knowledge," she explained. "Several neighbors mentioned you seemed unusually groggy in the weeks leading up to your accident. It's possible he intended to weaken you before the crash ever happened." The thought turned my blood to ice. Had Eric been planning my death even before the inheritance? The crash may not have been coincidence at all, but the final act of a plan I had narrowly survived. When I was finally discharged, I know I couldn't return to the apartment I had once shared with him. Too many memories. Too much danger. Vanessa surprised me by offering, "You could stay with me. My place isn't big, but it's safe." I shook my head. I can't impose. But she insisted, her determination soft but unyielding. "It's not an imposition. You're my mother. We have 17 years to make up for." Benjamin had another suggestion. "What about your uncle's estate? It's empty right now. With a few modifications for your recovery, it could be a fresh start." The idea rooted itself in my mind. Uncle James's countryside home, the place where I had once wandered through rooms filled with books and stories, was now mine. It felt symbolic, a chance to rebuild not only my life, but my family. Vanessa's eyes lit up when I mentioned it. "I'd love to see it. Maybe we could move there together, at least until you're fully recovered." For the first time since the accident, I felt a flicker of hope, a fragile vision of a life not defined by betrayal, but by healing. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing with certainty. Eric's lies had broken me, but they had also given me back something far more precious than money. They had brought me back my daughter. The drive to Uncle James's estate felt surreal. Vanessa sat behind the wheel, carefully navigating the winding country roads while I leaned against the seat, my crutches folded beside me. Snow dusted the fields, blanketing the landscape in white, and for the first time in weeks I allowed myself to breathe without feeling like the air was poisoned. The estate rose from the horizon just as I remembered. An old Victorian with wide porches and tall windows, the kind of house that seemed to hold secrets in its walls. Benjamin had arranged for renovations while I was still in the hospital. Ramps along the stairs, grab bars in the bathrooms, even a downstairs bedroom so I wouldn't have to strain my injured leg. As Vanessa helped me through the front door, I was struck by the sense of polished wood and faint dust, a memory of childhood visits that felt like another life. "It's beautiful," Vanessa whispered, her eyes wide as she spun slowly, taking in the carved banisters and high ceilings. I nodded, though my chest ached with something deeper than nostalgia. This house was more than walls and furniture. It was a symbol of both endings and beginnings. Uncle James had lived there alone, pouring his heart into business while neglecting his own happiness. I vowed then that I wouldn't repeat that mistake. Those first weeks were an adjustment. Vanessa and I moved carefully around each other, learning rhythms and habits like strangers forced to become roommates. She was a morning person, cheerful and chatty before the sun was fully up, while I clung to coffee in silence until I could function. She sang in the shower, I groaned through physical therapy exercises in the living room. But small rituals formed. Sunday movie nights, Thursday cooking experiments, daily walks around the garden as my strength returned. Each routine became a stitch binding us closer together. Therapy was brutal. My legs screamed with every stretch, my ribs ached when I breathed too deeply, and sometimes I wanted to give up entirely. But then I'd catch Vanessa watching me, her eyes filled with quiet determination, as if she were willing me not to quit. And I didn't. With each milestone, wheelchair to walker, walker to crutches, crutches to tentative steps, we celebrated with cupcakes from the local bakery, laughing like we'd been doing this for years instead of weeks. Yet, beneath the laughter, a heaviness lingered. One evening, as the fire crackled in the estate's grand fireplace, Vanessa broke the silence. "I'd like you to meet my parents," she said softly. My stomach tightened. "Do they hate me?" She shook her head firmly. "No, they've always spoken of you with respect. They said you were young, scared, and wanted the best for me. They supported me when I began searching. They'd be honored to meet you." The following weekend, Mark and Deanna Lawrence arrived. I was terrified. How do you face the people who had raised your child when you could not? But they greeted me with warmth, not judgment. Over tea, Deanna squeezed my hand and said, "We always knew one day she would find you. We've thought of ourselves as custodians, holding her safe until you were ready. We're glad that day has finally come." Their kindness undid me, and for the first time in years, I allowed myself to cry without shame. Meanwhile, the legal battle against Eric advanced. Benjamin guided me through hearings, where Eric appeared sullen and diminished in his orange jumpsuit. The artist who once charmed crowds with his confidence now looked hollow. When the judge sentenced him to 8 years for fraud, forgery, and bigamy, I felt no triumph, only relief that the nightmare was closing. One night, after a particularly exhausting day, Vanessa asked quietly, "Do you still love him?" I thought about it carefully before answering. No. I mourned the person I thought he was, but that person never really existed. I loved an illusion, and now the illusion is gone. The seasons shifted, and with them so did I. Vanessa and I planted a garden in the spring, turning the neglected grounds into something alive again. I started writing, first as therapy, then with intent. Words poured out. Our story, fictionalized but true in spirit. It was painful, yes, but it was also healing. And through it all, the estate changed too. What was once a lonely house became a home. Vanessa enrolled in university to study psychology, inspired by everything she'd endured, and I supported her as fiercely as I once supported Eric. Only this time, it was different. This time, the support was built on love that could never be broken. A full year passed before I realized I could breathe again without the weight of betrayal pressing on my chest. The anniversary of the accident arrived quietly, marked not by grief, but by gratitude. I hosted a small gathering at the estate, filling the grand halls with people who had carried me through the darkest chapters of my life. Sarah with her gentle strength, Benjamin with his steadfast loyalty, Dr. Jessica, who had helped me untangle trauma, Detective Jennings, who had pursued justice, and of course, Vanessa and her parents. We sat around the long dining table, laughter rising to the high ceilings, and I couldn't help but think Uncle James would have smiled to see his lonely house filled with life again. As the evening wound down, I raised my glass. "To unexpected journeys," I said, my voice steady, "and to the people who help us find our way when the road disappears beneath us." Everyone raised their glasses in return, and for the first time since that terrible crash, I felt whole. Later that night, Vanessa and I sat together on the porch, wrapped in blankets as the stars came out. The air was cool, the garden quiet, except for the distant hoot of an owl. She turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly, not giving me up, but everything that came after. The accident, Eric, the pain. I stared up at the sky, letting the question settle. Regret. Such a heavy word. "No," I answered slowly, "because regret means I would change the past if I could. And as painful as it was, it brought me back to you. If I erased the crash or the betrayal or even the inheritance that sparked it all, I might never have found you again." Vanessa's eyes shimmered with unshed tears as she leaned her head on my shoulder. "I'm glad we found each other," she whispered. "So am I, and I meant it with every fiber of my being." In the months that followed, my life transformed in ways I never could have predicted. My body healed steadily, the scars and aches serving as quiet reminders of survival. My writing blossomed into a manuscript, the pages filled with the story of love, betrayal, and resilience. A publisher eventually offered me a deal, and holding that first printed copy in my hands felt like reclaiming my voice. Vanessa thrived at university, throwing herself into psychology courses and internships. Watching her discover her passion was like watching the best parts of myself unfold in another person. Her parents visited often, and instead of tension, there was harmony. We became a blended family stitched together by choice and circumstance. As for Eric, he remained where he belonged, behind bars. Occasionally, I received updates from Benjamin about his appeals or failed attempts to reduce his sentence, but each time I felt more detached, as though Eric was nothing more than a character in a story I had already closed. The pain he caused would always be part of me, but it no longer defined me. Instead, what defined me now was strength. The strength to survive a crash that should have killed me. The strength to face betrayal without letting it break my spirit. The strength to open my heart again to a daughter I thought I had lost forever. One evening, standing in the garden with Vanessa, I realized that true wealth had nothing to do with the millions in my bank account. True wealth was the bond between us, the laughter shared over burnt dinners, the quiet support in therapy sessions, the courage to build a new family out of broken pieces. I lost a husband, yes, but I gained a daughter. I lost illusions, but I gained truth. And in the end, that was worth more than any inheritance could ever buy. As I sit here now, telling you this story, I can only hope it reaches someone who needs to hear it. Life will break you, sometimes in ways you never expect. But sometimes from those very cracks, light shines through. Sometimes the worst betrayals clear the path for the most beautiful beginnings. Have you ever experienced a betrayal that in the end gave you something you never imagined you could have? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this journey resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe for more stories of resilience, and share it with someone who might need the reminder that even our darkest nights can lead to dawn. Thank you for walking with me through mine.